The people that don't understand is there's a propaganda effort going on to make it so America will not, that every American president from now on will not end wars because of the blowback. They're trying to destroy Joe Biden's popularity so that the military-industrial complex can fund itself and steal from us forever. That's what it's about. If you're too dumb to see it, then you're going to help it. Cole the troll, Sundie. That's why it's up to us on the left and those of us with a platform to say Joe Biden is doing the right thing and this was the only way. It's funny, chat, because I was thinking yesterday. I was thinking, like, I sometimes assume that people have the same knowledge that I do, the same experiences I do. I think all of us do that, right? And we sometimes forget that our experiences are contextualized within a certain set of circumstance and a certain date and time, right? I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, the toys that I was playing with was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Transformers, right? That stuff, you know, and then I was playing on a Super Nintendo. I had a Nintendo and a Super Nintendo and an N64 in high school. Okay? Like that is my video gaming background, right? I was 18 on September 11th. So I was an adult for the entire war on terror. And I remember what it was like before September 11th, before we were in Afghanistan. I had my driver's license. I went to a funeral of someone who died in 9/11. So I had a little bit of a different experience. So I wasn't, well, I mean, 18, you're not really an adult, but people treated you like one. And so I remember what the cultural milieu was. I remember what the neoconservatives were arguing. I remember what neoconservatism is. Chad, do you even remember the last time you heard the word neocon? We're all talking about neoliberals now. Why did we stop using the phrase neocon? Because we falsely believed that the neoconservative ideology had been totally discredited with George W. Bush. When George W. Bush left office with a 25% approval rating, we thought neoconservatism is toast. And Donald Trump got elected by shitting all over the Bushes. So the relevance of neoconservatism from when I was 18 to today, I thought that had been relegated to the dustbin of history. And then I went on Twitch. Then I went on twitch.tv and I saw every neoconservative argument coming out of the mouths of people who said they supported Bernard Sanders in the 2020 and 2016 Democratic primary. And I am flabbergasted. So maybe we should take some time and talk about what is a neoconservative, why was it discredited, and why is it making a comeback? But before we do that, I want us to watch some of the new things that are happening. Well, maybe we'll start it off. Okay, how about this? We'll start it off with the George Bush letter that he just published about Afghanistan. All right? And let us read the Bush thing. Let's get right into politics, all right? Let's not fuck around. Don't call it a comeback. It's been here for years. Oh, I know, Steve McFly. I know that it's continued to exist among the media class. It's continued to exist among, you know, the what we call the foreign policy blob. But neoconservatism coming out of the mouths of people that call themselves left-wing is utterly baffling. All right, let's read the Bush letter. Laura and I have been watching the tragic events unfolding in Afghanistan with deep sadness. Our hearts are heavy for both the Afghan people who have suffered so much and for the American and NATO allies who have sacrificed so much. The Afghans now at greatest risk are the same ones who have been on the forefront of progress inside their nation. President Biden has promised to evacuate these Afghans along with the American citizens and our allies. The United States government has the legal authority to cut the red tape for refugees during an urgent humanitarian crisis, and we have the responsibility and the resources to secure safe passage for them now without bureaucratic delay. Our most stalwart allies, along with private NGOs, are ready to help. Laura and I are confident that the evacuation efforts will be effective because they are being carried out by the remarkable men and women of the United States Armed Forces, Diplomatic Corps, and Intelligence community. And I want to speak to them directly, along with the veterans who have served in Afghanistan. All right, before we continue, if the United States military, diplomatic corps, and intelligence community cared about the people of Afghanistan or were competent in their stated war aim, we wouldn't be where we are. So either there is something wrong with these institutions or something wrong with the mission. I offer you the argument that it's both. Many of you deal with the wounds of war, both visible and invisible, and some of your brothers and sisters in arms made the ultimate sacrifice in the war on terror. Each day, we have been humbled by your commitment and your courage. You took out a brutal enemy and denied Al-Qaeda a safe haven while building schools, sending supplies, and providing medical care. You kept America safe from further terror attacks, provided 2 decades of security and opportunity for millions, and made America proud. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts and will always honor your contributions. In times like these, it can be hard to remain optimistic. Laura and I steadfastly remain so. Like our country, Afghanistan is also made up of resilient, vibrant people. Nearly 65% of the population is under 25 years old. The choices they will make for opportunity, education, and liberty will also determine Afghanistan's future. As Dr. Sekna Yaqubi of the Afghan Institute of Learning, which has opened schools for girls and women throughout the nation, wrote this week, "While we are afraid, we are not defeated." She added, "Ideals do not disappear so easily. One cannot kill whispers on the wind. The Taliban cannot crush a dream. We will prevail, even if it takes longer than we wanted it to." Laura and I, along with the team at the Bush Center, stand ready as Americans lend our support and assistance in this time of need. Let us all resolve to be united in saving lives and praying for the people of Afghanistan. So, this is absolute horseshit. And the purpose of this letter is to whitewash George Bush's utter incompetence and failure in Afghanistan. That is that's the truth. That's the reality. U.S. tried to pull a British and colonize something again. We really failed at that. You know, I feel like at this point, if you don't know the reality of Afghanistan, you're in my stream, you're knowingly ignoring reality. With the constant doomer news, can we get some NDP hopium? There's nothing doomer. What? This isn't doomer. This is great news. All right, chat. It's time for big dick motherfucking Biden, man. I love it, man. Let's check it out. It was amazing watching people Google stuff to try to justify their take that the war was good actually last night. I mean, that's the problem with these debate bros, right? They lock themselves into absurd positions. Jesus. All right, let's keep going.
Here's the president.
That have taken place in the last week and the steps we're taking to address the rapidly evolving events. My national security team and I have been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including and contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. I'll speak more in a moment about the specific steps we're taking, but I want to remind everyone how we got here and what America's interests are in Afghanistan. We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. I think one of the things that is really disgusting to me is actual virtue signaling.
and using it for trying to keep the United States in a war that we cannot win. And we've known we can't win for a decade now. All right? And we're going to get into it more in depth. The United States of America cannot win in Afghanistan. And if you're like, Mike, well, we only had a couple thousand troops and we were holding the government up. Why did we take out those last troops? The reason why the Taliban had not taken over the country before this week was not because of military incapability. It was because of a treaty they signed with America, where they said, we will not attack while you're doing the drawdown. And while that treaty was in place, the Taliban was going around to local Afghan National Army commanders and making deals for their surrender, some of which switched sides to the Taliban. But the Taliban was not fighting and killing a lot of people. There may have been isolated skirmishes, but there was not. These were not military attacks. They were negotiated surrenders. And the military contingent that was in the country was not there to secure the Afghan national government. Diplomacy was doing that. And when the period of time for the withdrawal ended, and it was scheduled to be by September 11th, and the United States made significant moves to pull out their troops, that's when the Taliban began to roll. And the Taliban was not going around. There was only, I think, 2 military units that resisted. One division of the Afghan National Army and the Special Forces, but I think that was like literally hours. Feel free to fact check me on that if we have anybody with even more in-depth knowledge. And so if you're like, well, why can't we just maintain the 3,000 troops we had this year? The answer is that 3,000 troops could not defeat the Taliban. We would need tens of thousands of troops in order to fight the Taliban. We would need billions of dollars of new equipment. We would need a huge investment of men and soldiers, airmen, Marines to go back to Afghanistan and fight a bloody conflict again. That was not going to happen. So the status quo of this year was known to all parties to be temporary. And the Americans were trying to stand up the Afghan National Army to fight a civil war against the Taliban after we were gone. And it would be a proxy conflict where we funded our proxies and other people would support the Taliban. Well, guess what? Our proxies were so incompetent and so corrupt that the moment our soldiers stepped out of country, they folded. They had absolutely no legitimate support within the country that was interested in fighting for that institution. That's a lack of institutional legitimacy. This is the very basis of sovereignty, the very basis of legitimacy. Whether or not the nation and the state have mutual codependence and mutual recognition. The Afghan National Army did not have that with the Afghan people. It just did not. They had 4 times the soldiers than the Taliban. They had 20 times the resources, and they had far better technology, international support. They had it all, but they didn't want to fight. It's just that simple. And I don't know why this is the facts. I don't know what to tell you. No amount of hand-wringing or, well, what we could have done it better is right. The idea that we could go into Afghanistan, invade, set up a nation in our image, and impose it on the Afghan people and have it be durable is the essence of neoconservatism. That's what Wolfowitz said. That is what we were doing in the Bush administration. We're going to go to Iraq. We're going to invade. It's going to be a glorious shining city on the hill. We're going to set up these democratic institutions of free market capitalism and democracy, and they're going to it's going to be a million flowers blooming. That was the essence of neoconservatism, and it did not work. You can't do it. especially in nations like Iraq and Afghanistan, which were artificial creations imposed upon them by Western powers. In Afghanistan, the British, same thing with Iraq. When the Ottoman Empire fell, Iraq was 3 provinces within the Ottoman Empire that were cobbled together. It's an artificial creation. It's not like Turkey or Japan, okay? Where there is a long-standing state and nation. That's just not a thing, okay? It was a colonial creation and imposed upon a group of people of various tribes. That was true of Afghanistan. That was true of Iraq. And so we have this false... So I thought that I would never have to argue neoconservatism again. But with the pullout of Afghanistan, the neoconservatives are out in droves again. Well, if we just spent another 5 years and another $100 billion or another $500 billion, we could have built up 20 years. 20 years is more than enough time to show whether or not your project was working. It was not. A relevant term might be imagined communities, i.e. the sense of national ethnic community among people who don't personally know each other. Exactly, Al Feathers. That's what I'm describing. That's what nation means. Neoconservative never declined or disappeared, Funkadelic says. If anything, it's stronger than ever with the right-wing polarization of the Overton window under Trump as it veers toward proto-fascism or outright fascism. Arguably, the U.S. is more neoconservative than it was in the 2000s.
Now, I want to be clear about this. The thing that's frustrated me is that a lot of people on the left pretend that us pulling out of Afghanistan would be a good thing. Like, that the Afghan people are, like, just waiting to yearn and breathe free to remove the American occupation. Make no mistake, the American occupation was relatively small and relatively cheap, all things considered.
So, that's an imperialist. Straight up. Just so you know, chat, the bipartisan infrastructure deal is $500 billion in new spending. $500 billion for all of our infrastructure. Bernie Sanders' bill is $3.5 trillion to rejuvenate so much aspects of our country. Right now we have I've seen 1.7 trillion. This result says 1.57 trillion. Okay, here you go. According to this website, it says that Americans owe over 1.7 trillion in student loan debt. So in other words, 44.7 million people would not have a scrap of student debt with $500 billion to spare to fully fund the bipartisan infrastructure deal or the war in Afghanistan. Cheap. That's cheap. How do you people listen to this guy? I don't get it. Afghan war has cost American taxpayers $2 trillion. $2 trillion equals end homelessness, $20 billion. Insulin for diabetics, $40 billion. Universal pre-K, $60 billion. SNAP, which is food stamps, for 40 million Americans, $80 billion. Universal 4-year college, $70 billion. Cancel all medical debt, $140 billion. Cancel all student debt, $1.6 trillion. Combined with the illegal Iraq war, the U.S. government has spent more than $6 trillion over the past 2 decades on war. Wars that have killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Afghan civilians, displaced millions, and killed thousands of U.S. soldiers, tens of thousands. And we are no closer to peace and justice. Tens of thousands wounded, rather. With $6 trillion wasted in Afghanistan and Iraq, never believe the lie that we cannot afford human rights like health care, education, and shelter. We need public servants who prioritize justice and people over power and profits. We need the American people to mobilize for justice and peace. And here's the thing that I would remind you, chat, is that our invasions in Iraq and Afghanistan have not made them better off. And we may have fomented the rise of fascism in the world because the destabilization of Iraq and Syria created ISIS, created a humongous refugee crisis that destabilized politics throughout the world and has helped grow the far right throughout Germany and Eastern Europe. That is the reality. So not because people don't want to move. They want to stay, for the most part, in their own countries of birth where their family and their friends and the culture that they're accustomed to exist. They want to live in peace and prosperity and the freedom to pursue the life they want to pursue. That's what every human being wants. And the United States of America invasion in Afghanistan and Iraq did not make either country better off. It didn't. Here's what a left-winger says. This is Bernie Sanders' staff director. I can't believe I have to say this. The only thing that we accomplished by going into Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan was to put trillions of taxpayer dollars into the military-industrial complex and destroy millions of lives, period, full stop. It's time to stop repeating the same mistakes over and over again. As far as what happened in Iraq, even if you were just a realpolitik, bloodless psychopath who only cared in American national interest, we have successfully put Iraq into the hands of into the side of the Iranian state. Iraq is now closer allied to Iran than any other country in the world. I thought Iran was the big bad, according to those nationalist psychos. Well, guess what? We've increased the power of Iran, the Islamic State of Iran. That's the reality. That's the truth. I said something yesterday that I want everyone to be clarified, to clarify for everyone, excuse me. And that was that the United States has no national interest in Afghanistan. That doesn't mean that I'm a realpolitik nationalist. I'm a leftist. I don't believe that nations and states should be launching wars of aggression on other states. I don't believe that we should use military force to uphold American hegemony. Furthermore, the only time the use of force is justified internationally is when it has a clear mandate. That is not the situation with the war on terror. We are constantly violating international law as it exists. We are constantly supporting the violation of international law and aggression around the world. That is not legitimate. Do you agree that Biden is messing up by not helping on the humanitarian side more? No. Let's watch Biden.
A decade ago, our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been.
Now, chat, I want to stop you right there. Why was that not our mission? Why was it not our mission to go into Afghanistan and create a pluralistic democracy? Because we learned that lesson in Vietnam. We didn't have the capability. We wouldn't, whenever the U.S. military tries to build a puppet, they end up being corrupt. We end up making dirty deals that's convenient for our tactical situation. We put in corrupt, evil fucks into power. They don't have the support of the population. That was the biggest lesson for Vietnam. That we cannot invade countries and impose our will upon those people. They will resist and they will win. Why do you think Colin Powell was even Secretary of State for George W. Bush? Because he came up with what was known as the Powell Doctrine in opposition to the neocons. This is some deep shit. This is some deep history and political knowledge, which you're not going to get from any other streamer. So I might as well do it for you. Powell represented a different because Dro, and I don't like General Powell or Secretary Powell, but he was part of a generation of people who fought in Vietnam. Powell fought in Vietnam. In fact, he was wounded. He stepped into a booby traps. All right. And so he came up as he was a professional officer. As he came up the military, he developed what he called the Powell Doctrine, which was an idea of we can't do nation building. It doesn't work. The Powell Doctrine is a journalist-created term named after General Colin Powell for a doctrine that Powell created in the run-up to the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War. The doctrine poses questions emphasizing national security interests, overwhelming strike capabilities, and an emphasis on ground forces and widespread public support, all of which have to be answered affirmatively before military action is taken. Here's the doctrine. Is the vital national security interest threatened? Do we have a clear, attainable objective? Have the risks and costs been fully and frankly analyzed? Have all other non-violent policy means been fully exhausted? Is there a plausible exit strategy to avoid endless entanglement? Have the consequences of our actions been fully considered? Is the action supported by the American people? Do we have genuine, broad international support? And so if you look at the Powell Doctrine, it basically, and I'm not saying this is the way that we should run foreign policy, which is quite frankly a construction of the liberal status quo that we have in the first place. The world is divided by classes, not these nation states. The question of Afghanistan war is that if you are honest and you frankly look at what the American people were feeling like in October of 2001, you could say yes to many of these questions. But you know what you can't say yes to? And what do you mean by that, Mike? They wanted vengeance, and that was their mission. Go kill Al-Qaeda. Go get Osama bin Laden. But that's not the doctrine that we actually used. We got into Afghanistan, and we did it under the neoconservative model of building up American power, creating client states, and we continued to expand the mission. It went from let's get vengeance for 9/11, a position that the American people supported, whether you do or not now in hindsight, that's the reality. We did have international support. It expanded to, well, now we have to build up Afghanistan, democracy. All this bullshit came in to justify the military-industrial complex's continued presence in Afghanistan. And the mission went in 8 different fucking directions. Now, why did it do that? Because George Bush failed to get Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden escaped Afghanistan. And after 8 years of the Bush presidency and failing to get the vengeance we went to Afghanistan for, Bush had to come up with another excuse. Well, we don't really care about Afghanistan. Here, let me get you the quote. I'll show you when. Flashback. Bush on bin Laden. I really just don't spend that much time on him.
Fabia.
Mr. President, in your speeches now, you rarely talk or mention Osama bin Laden. Why is that? Also, can you tell the American people if you have any more information, if you know if he is dead or alive? Final part here. Deep in your heart, don't you truly believe that until you find out if he is dead or alive, you won't really eliminate the threat of
Well, deep in my heart, I know the man's on the run if he's alive at all. And who knows if he's hiding in some cave or not. We hadn't heard from him in a long time. And the idea of focusing on one person is really indicates to me people don't understand the scope of the mission. Terror is bigger than one person. And he's a person who's now been marginalized. His network is his host government has been destroyed. He's the ultimate parasite who found weakness, exploited it, and met his match. He is, as I mentioned in my speeches, I do mention the fact that this is a fellow who is willing to commit youngsters to their death, and he himself tries to hide, if in fact he's hiding at all. So I don't know where he is. Nor do, I just don't spend that much time on him, Ellie, to be honest with you. I'm more worried about making sure that our soldiers are well supplied, that the strategy is clear, that the coalition is strong, that when we...
So after 8 years of failure to catch Osama bin Laden, they had to justify our presence in Afghanistan in a different way, which is, well, now we're building up Afghanistan. We're building up the people of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, we weren't. 25% of the Afghans are unemployed. The ones that are employed are spending, especially the agricultural regions, are spending their time creating opium for the heroin trade, which they sell to who? The Taliban. So for the entire Bush presidency, he failed to get Osama bin Laden. And so we had to create this new, what's called mission creep. We had to create this new justification for our positions and our occupation of Afghanistan. Oh, we're bringing democracy. And to put a veneer of human concern around a disgusting imperial war that dragged on and on and on. Let's keep going.
Preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission is nation building. We gave up Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to be nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been: preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why, as president, I'm adamant that we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. These threats warrant our attention and our resources. We conduct effective counterterrorism missions against terrorist groups in multiple countries where we don't have permanent military presence. If necessary, we'll do the same in Afghanistan. We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States in the region and act quickly and decisively if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office.
The Draco Lich.
U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1. There was no agreement protecting our forces after May 1. There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only a cold reality of either following through on the agreement to withdraw our forces or escalating the conflict and sending thousands more American troops back into combat in Afghanistan, lurching into the third decade of conflict. I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not.
All right, there's a talking point that people are repeating, which quite frankly is stupid. And I understand why you're saying it, because it strikes you as like morally true and kind of obvious, but it is delusional, magical thinking. Okay? And I want you to know that. All right? Now, it's going to be hard to hear, so I want you not to get triggered. All right? Do your best. There was no way to evacuate all of the people who worked with the United States before the U.S. withdrew, because the Afghan national government was not competent enough to do the task. All right? Because if it was competent, it would have been standing up to the Taliban and would not have collapsed in 5 minutes. All right? You are pretending that there existed some civil society and bureaucracy that could have gone through and also maintained its efficacy while the people that we were taking out of country were being taken out. Who do you think the people that we were taking out of the country were? The bureaucrats and the translators that worked with us. They're going to keep bringing, like, what do you think is happening here? This is an IKEA furniture packing up in a box that we can smoothly put on a plane? That's nonsense. The moment it became clear that the Americans were leaving, all those institutions that would do the job of helping the evacuation collapsed. And the U.S., by the way, passed laws already to allow Afghan translators. They already did this stuff well ahead of time. We've been trying to line up special visas and programs to bring these people over. And we have been bringing these people over. But the idea that we could have brought them all over before withdrawal is nonsense. It's just not acceptable unless you want the U.S. to go back at war with the Taliban. You want 25, 35, 50,000 U.S. troops to go back to Afghanistan, colonize the country, serve as the government, and then go through and take out every Afghan. And by the way, by doing that, you generate new people that we need to now take out. Because what? Are you going to, what are we going to do? Send over American street sweepers and garbage men? And what are you talking about? It's nonsense. That's just magical thinking. Now, there are heart-rending scenes. A few people have been killed. Some tried to hold on the side of a plane that was taking off and fell to their deaths. Others were in a mob that was trying to surge towards planes and were killed in a stampede. Those are tragic deaths. Those are horrible deaths. And I feel terrible for those families. And I want the United States to go out of their way to find the families that were affected by those tragedies and bring them here. But the only way we're going to do that, to bring the people home to the U.S. who helped us, is by negotiating with the Taliban, recognizing the reality on the ground that the Afghan national government was a puppet of the United States, and it is not a real thing. It's not its own entity. It's a house of cards. It fell apart. And that was always the case. And that's always been the case. And that is the finding of the Afghan papers. That was the finding of the the investigator, the IG for Afghanistan reconstruction. If you go and look at the report, that's all they say. They say they couldn't do anything in Afghanistan. It was so utterly corrupt and incompetent. They would take money for investment in Afghanistan, give it to Afghan officials, and they would steal it all. They had more money than projects to do. They were just handing out cash to people. I know that many of you don't know this stuff, which is fine. You're normal. You don't want to look at the Afghanistan shit all the time. You don't care. I get it. But I have. And let me tell you, anybody telling you that we can do anything but what happened here today is a liar, or they're just stupid and they haven't done the homework. It's just the way it is. Now, that doesn't mean we abandon them. I'm not an advocate of them being abandoned. I think we should take all the Afghan refugees to this country who want to come. I think we should bring them over here if they want to. But you need to recognize that this is a country with a 30% literacy rate. This is a country that is extremely religiously conservative. And there's going to need to be a lot of money spent on bringing these people over to the United States and helping them to acclimate to America. It's going to be difficult, but I don't know what to say. This is why the war, the way it was fought in the first place, was fundamentally flawed, and everybody knows it. So listen to what Joe Biden is saying. I mean, Jesus, imagine being to the right of Joe Biden.
Be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force of some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something the Taliban doesn't have. Taliban does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future. There's some very brave and capable Afghan special forces units and soldiers. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots on the ground would have made any difference. Here's what I believe to my core.
Now, chat, you could disagree with that. But if you disagree with that, I think you're fucking stupid and downright. I mean, the war has been going on longer than many of you have been alive. The now former Afghan government refused to even accept the truth that we were leaving until the very last minute, and it's painfully obvious who doesn't have a clue about this situation. I grew up around the military. I went to far too many funerals. I worked briefly in a position related to this withdrawal, and clearly people aren't recognizing what led up to this. I'm with you on this, Mike, and I'm tired of people thinking there would have been a better time. You know what the best time to leave Afghanistan was? 10 years ago. After we killed Osama bin Laden and degraded Al-Qaeda, we got our bloody vengeance. The mandate was closed. And you know where we got that bloody vengeance? Pakistan. Because that's where the Taliban comes from.
It is wrong to order American troops.
I completely agree with ending this. I just feel for all the veterans who went there and now feel that it was all for nothing. All those lives of people hurt. It needed to end. Is there any way to negotiate with the Taliban to get refugees out or prevent their crimes against humanity? I assume the first is easier than the second. Well, the Taliban is saying that they are different than the Taliban that they used to be, and that they're going to be more constructive, and that they're going to have an amnesty. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to go after people. They absolutely are. They're going to kill people. They're going to do reprisals. One of the things that really depresses me about this is, like, you could try to make it about me because you don't have any arguments other than kind of wringing your hands and going, well, we should have done a better job. It's a mistake. Blah, blah. And here's the reason why I'm pushing back, chat. Because there's a propaganda effort. Here's what people, like, who, they're just so fucking stupid. The people that don't understand is there's a propaganda effort going on to make it so America will not, that every American president from now on will not end wars because of the blowback. They're trying to destroy Joe Biden's popularity so that the military-industrial complex can fund itself and steal from us forever. That's what it's about. If you're too dumb to see it, then you're going to help it. Cole the troll. Sundie. That's why it's up to us on the left and those of us with a platform to say Joe Biden is doing the right thing and this was the only way. Because it just so happens to be true, and he should not in any way be punished for doing the right fucking thing. We need to support these people. We need to support Joe Biden's decision. If you want to see the forever wars end, you've got to support his decision to end it. And you can't be delusional because you want a virtue signal about how much you care about Afghans. That's bullshit. That's wrong. Especially if you never served. Especially if you're not willing to put your own ass on the line. Fuck you. Fuck you for being a chicken hawk. Fuck you for wanting to put more people in harm's way so you can sit back and feel good about yourself. It's tough for a lot of people to know that their friends died in vain, that they suffered wounds and mutilations for nothing. It wasn't for nothing. It was to get vengeance for 9/11. If that's a good enough reason for you, that's a good enough reason. We killed Osama bin Laden. If that's good for you, that's what the war was for. That's what the American people wanted. They wanted vengeance. They got their bloody vengeance. What more do you want? How many you think do it voluntarily and not because of lack of opportunity? Exactly. I'm not going to go out here and nitpick Joe Biden and say, well, we could have escaped with absolutely no one being hurt. We could have pulled out with absolutely no one who ever worked with us, ever suffering any reprisals. That's fantasy. That's make-believe. If you want fantasy and make-believe, you can go somewhere else. I'm going to tell you the reality. That was impossible. That's why you don't do wars. Because they cause collateral damage. Innocent people get killed. It's hell on earth. There's no way to fight a war clean. There's no way to fight a war without getting your hands dirty. There's no way to fight a war without innocent people being lives being destroyed. That's why we don't do wars. And then unless it's the absolute last resort. It's not like a video game. Saw so many delusional comments on Insta saying leaving Afghanistan will lead to terror attacks on our own soil. LMAO, brain rot. The reason why there was a terrorist attacks happen on the U.S. soil in the first place is because we were involving and invading the Middle East. Do you even read why Al-Qaeda supposedly attacked us? It's because of our military bases in Saudi Arabia. It's because of our interference. And it's because of our money funding the House of Saud. The United States is so ally where 13 of the hijackers were from. Where the classified 9/11 Commission report says that the Saudi royal family was behind it. Our supposed allies. The Taliban, formed in Pakistan by the Pakistan Intelligence Service. With teaching children in madrasas with textbooks written in Omaha, Nebraska. Using weapons given to them by the United States government. I know some of you are 20 years old and this happened 20 years ago, and a lot of us people think that this stuff. But if you want peace, we need to stop interfering. I have a question, just what your thoughts. Is going to war sometimes a necessary evil? Yes, of course it is. I am not a pacifist. And in many ways, I'll be honest. In 2001, I supported getting vengeance on Osama bin Laden. And on September 11th, I'm going to talk honestly about what I was feeling at the time. Because I was an adult. I remember what I was believing, what I did, what happened. And that's different than 20 years later, we're going to stay in Afghanistan because we're going to nation build. It's not, hey, first 20 years didn't work, but maybe another 20. Maybe we'll have grandsons and grandfathers fighting in the same war. Why not great-grandfathers and great-grandsons fighting in the same war?
To get vengeance for 9/11. If that were the case, we should have invaded Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely correct. Nathaniel, thank you for the tier 1 sub. Exactly. And here's what I'll say. If somebody attacks America and does a terrorist attack on America, then we should pursue them for the international criminal that they are. You know, the best way to fight terrorist organizations is not with military force, but with international cooperation and, banking regulation. Arresting and prosecuting bankers that fund and launder money for these terrorist organizations. By stopping our intelligence services of our allies from propping them up. From preventing the CIA from funding death squads. Let's keep going.
to step up when Afghanistan's own armed forces would not. The political leaders of Afghanistan were unable to come together for the good of their people, unable to negotiate for the future of their country when the chips were down. They would never have done so while U.S. troops remained in Afghanistan, bearing the brunt of the fighting for them. And our true strategic competitors, China and Russia, would love nothing more than the United States to continue to funnel billions of dollars in resources and attention into stabilizing Afghanistan indefinitely. When I hosted President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah at the White House in June, and again when I spoke by phone to Ghani in July, we had very frank conversations. We talked about how Afghanistan should prepare to fight their civil wars after the U.S. military departed, to clean up the corruption in government so that the government could function for the Afghan people. We talked extensively about the need for Afghan leaders to unite politically. They fail to do any of that. I also urge them to engage in diplomacy, to seek a political settlement with the Taliban. This advice was flatly refused. Mr. Ghani insisted the Afghan forces would fight. He was wrong. So I'm left again to ask of those who argue that we should stay, how many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives, American lives, is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country, of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. Those are the mistakes we cannot continue to repeat because we have significant vital interest in the world that we cannot afford to ignore. I also want to acknowledge how painful this is to so many of us. The scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan, they're gut-wrenching, particularly for our veterans, our diplomats, humanitarian workers, for anyone who has spent time on the ground working to support the Afghan people, for those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan, and for Americans who have fought and served in the country, serve our country in Afghanistan. This is deeply, deeply personal. It is for me as well. I've worked on these issues as long as anyone. I've been throughout Afghanistan during this war, while the war was going on, from Kabul to Kandahar to the Kunar Valley. I've traveled there on 4 different occasions. I've met with the people. I've spoken to the leaders. I spent time with our troops, and I came to understand firsthand what was and was not possible in Afghanistan. So now we're focused on what is possible. We will continue to support the Afghan people. We will lead with our diplomacy, our international influence, and our humanitarian aid. We'll continue to push for regional diplomacy and engagement to prevent violence and instability. We'll continue to speak out for the basic rights of the Afghan people, of women and girls, just as we speak out all over the world. I've been clear that human rights must be the center of our foreign policy, not the periphery. But the way to do it is not through endless military deployments. It's with our diplomacy, our economic tools, and rallying the world to join us. Let me lay out the current mission in Afghanistan. I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan for the purpose of assisting in the departure of U.S. and allied civilian personnel from Afghanistan and to evacuate our Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghans to safety outside of Afghanistan. Our troops are working to secure the airfield and to ensure continued operation of both the civilian and military flights. We're taking over air traffic control. We have safely shut down our embassy and transferred our diplomats. Our diplomatic presence is now consolidated at the airport as well. Over the coming days, we intend to transport out thousands of American citizens who've been living and working in Afghanistan. We'll also continue to support.
We should vote no on the recall of Gavin Newsom, obviously. Has there ever been a functional democracy installed by a foreign occupying power? Haven't all modern democracies been formed from domestic movements and revolutions? So even if you use the best case of, say, the Japanese Reconstruction, the reality of the Japanese Reconstruction is that we put in, it was a one-party state, and they ruled Japan for like, what was it? How many years in a row, chat? I can't remember off the top of my head, but even, and, you know, the respect, you know, I'd say Japan is the best example of Japanese Reconstruction. But that was done, you know, that was a very strong national identity. Like, there's a reason why we pardoned the imperial royal family and we got them to buy into the project. There's a lot of horrible war criminals that were pardoned and got off scot-free for the horrible crimes they committed. And the U.S. did invest quite a bit. I'd say Japan, but again, as I said, so that, you know, that was based on, you know, very unique circumstances on the ground. It was a strong centralized nation state. It had the buy-in from kind of a unified elite that kind of accepted defeat and went along with the U.S. project. And it still took decades. And we did all sorts of stuff to defeat leftist movements and left-wing movements within Japan as well. So it's probably safe to say it wasn't a real democracy for a long time, or at least, you know, even like a bourgeois democracy that we talk about in like other Western countries. Yeah, the CIA was supported the right wing as well, clandestinely, to marginalize the left in Japan. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's probably the best example, but you know.
Support the safe departure of civilian personnel, the civilian personnel of our allies who are still serving in Afghanistan. Operation Allies.
But even then, like Japan, like, is nothing like Afghanistan. Okay, Germany is nothing like Afghanistan. All right, like, what? It's not even close to the same comparison. It's absurd.
Which I announced back in July, has already moved 2,000 Afghans who are eligible for special immigration visas.
Nice, Dennis.
And their families to the United States. In the coming days, the U.S. military will provide...
Why are you advocating for Gavin Newsom when there's a third option? He can resign. The left needs to be able to kill the hostage. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I should look more into the recall tactics. Honestly, I'll be honest. I haven't cared about the recall election much because I don't like Gavin Newsom. And it's just not been important enough of a story for me to spend time on it. So I can take a look at what people, because I don't want to helicopter in with, telling you exactly what to do without consulting leftists from California and what the plans are and what they're doing.
Assistance to move more SIV eligible Afghans and their families out of Afghanistan. We're also expanding refugee access to cover other vulnerable Afghans who worked for our embassy. U.S. non-governmental agencies or U.S. non-governmental organizations and Afghans who otherwise are at great risk, and U.S. news agencies. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence.
So there you go, chat. We could have done better with the refugee crisis, or we could have done better. The Afghan national government didn't want them to and blocked them. So what was Biden supposed to do? Overrule them? Come in with what the fuck are you talking about?
American troops are performing this
DSA said vote for Newsom. Okay, well there you go.
Professionally and as
do what
effectively
DSA
as
says.
they always do. But it is not without risks. As we carry out this departure, we have made it clear to the Taliban, if they attack our personnel or disrupt our operation, the U.S. presence will be swift and the response will be swift and forceful. We will defend our people with devastating force if necessary. Our current military mission will be short in time, limited in scope, and focused in its objectives. Get our people and our allies to safety as quickly as possible. And once we have completed this mission, we will conclude our military withdrawal. We will end America's longest war after 20 long years of bloodshed. The events we're seeing now are sadly proof that no amount of military force would ever deliver a stable, united, secure Afghanistan, as known in history as the graveyard of empires.
Biden just explained it.
What's happening now could just as easily happen 5 years ago or 15 years in the future. You have to be honest. Our mission in Afghanistan is taking many missteps, made many missteps over the past 2 decades. I'm now the 4th American president to preside over war in Afghanistan. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans.
Jedi Chai says, I thought I was a liberal until I started watching your streams and realized I'm in fact a leftist. Because of you, I joined the local DSA chapter. I watch you every morning while working and you're a big part of my day. And then I listen to Hassan afterwards. So I just want to say thank you for being part of my day. Wow, Jedi Chai, that's really sweet. And I want to show you, chat. This is how this is what a member of my community, the average member of my community, learns about politics, been pushed to the left, joined their local DSA, and is actually getting involved. That is fucking praxis right there. Corey Graphics, thank you for the tier 1. And honestly, like, the Pepe laws of the world, they just make me laugh with their pathetic, dumbass takes, and they're embarrassing. they have to create a false narrative, and everybody who watches me knows it's bullshit. I did the math. 20 years in Afghanistan, we got 2 months before collapse, so every 6 months or so, we would get 1 extra day of stability. Yeah.
I will not.
What's the DSA? The Democratic Socialists of America.
Pass this responsibility onto a 5th president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today.
Look at all the people saying I convinced them to join DSA. Praxis.
I am president of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face. But I do not regret my decision to end America's warfighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world. Our mission to degrade the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and kill Osama bin Laden was a success. Our decades-long effort to overcome.
Look at all the people saying they joined DSA because of me. No, you joined DSA because of you. So let's not get distracted from Joe. I'm trying to watch Big Dick Joe Biden right now.
Degrade the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and kill Osama bin Laden was a success. Our decades-long effort to overcome centuries of history and permanently change and remake Afghanistan was not. And I wrote and believed it never could be. I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war.
Wow, Nathaniel, that's really sweet of you.
Suffering life-shattering injuries, leaving families broken by grief and loss. This is not in our national security interest. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops, who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades, deserve. I made a commitment to the American people when I ran for president that I would bring America's military involvement in Afghanistan to an end. While it's been hard and messy, And yes, far from perfect, I've honored that commitment. More importantly, I made a commitment to the brave men and women who serve this nation that I wasn't going to ask them to continue to risk their lives in a military action that should have ended long ago. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a fifth one, because it's the right one, it's the right decision for our people, the right one for our brave service members who risk their lives serving our nation, and it's the right one for America. Thank you. May God protect our troops, our diplomats, and all brave Americans serving in harm's way.
All I can say, chat, is what an incredible speech. What an actual Chad. And I don't know what to say. He's 100% right. And this isn't about the Afghans as a people, like the individual Afghans don't have the ability to be educated or trained. It's the national government has no legitimacy. Nobody wants to die for it because they don't believe in it. That's just a statement of fact. We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy. The morning politics guy. Politics Frogs in every single day. Same time, 10 a.m. Day in, day out. And we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord, where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid. And you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord, come hang out, and maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.